Eleanor Crabb from the Open University. Eleanor, do you want to share your screen? And Eleanor is coming at this from a slightly different perspective because, of course, Eleanor is working at the Open University, which are the essentially, I'm going to say gold standard, Eleanor, to bring you up in terms of thinking about how we teach online, because this is their professional job. This is something that they do. I just thought it would be useful to hear from Eleanor from two sides, I guess, and I don't want to preempt your presentation, Eleanor, but I suppose from your extensive experience in doing this online, and perhaps some tips and tricks you can share, but also from the reality of what is still difficult. So I'm not sure you're going to go down that path, but I think I'm just very excited to hear what you have to say. So Eleanor, I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, so thank you, Michael. So the first thing I'd like to say is we're probably not the experts at this. We've been doing it maybe a bit longer than everybody else, but a lot of the issues that you are all grappling with, we have been, and I would say we still are very much grappling with. So, but I'm going to talk you through some of the things that we do in terms of designing our modules, in particular, structuring our courses at the Open University. And actually, you'll see I'm going to be picking up quite a lot from what both Christy and Catherine have been saying, particularly in terms of workload and structure. Okay, so a little bit of background on the Open University. So the OU is a distance learning university. It offers blended supported learning. Some of you, though you're probably all a lot younger, may remember the old days when we used to have television programs in the middle of the night, where our lectures would have been delivered, so to speak. The OU tends to operate in a modular way, so students register for qualification, but then they re-register for modules every year. The majority of them, our modules will start in October. They run through till June. They will either be, they're large modules, so they're either 300 study hours, so 30 credits, or 60 credits. And students will often do more than one module at a time. So we do have quite a few students who would be going at almost 120 credits while they're working, and they have families. So, so for us, you'll see in a minute, workload is a real issue. So the modules are written and supported by a module team, but actually when they're on a module, students are assigned an associate lecturer or a tutor for each of the modules that they're on, and they're in small groups. They also have access to a student support team and a whole raft of other support, but I wasn't really going to be dwelling on that. The key thing that in chemistry, all our modules are now delivered entirely online. So we've been moving across it for the last few years, but as I say, we're now entirely online, with the exception of lab schools. So a lot of the issues, I say, that Christy and Catherine have been raising are something that we have to try and deal with. Okay, so I was going to talk about 6 main drivers that we use to try and support engagement. So the delivery, the learning design processes that we go through, workload, and then some more standard stuff really about reflection, assessment, feedback, support, and the connectiveness, I think, that both the previous were talking about. So when we're designing, and this relates to the whole delivery as well here, we have a lot of colleagues who look very much at like the learning design and how we should be designing and structuring our modules. So and they have saying a lot of work is done on assessing what's gone previously. So currently they're very much on this idea of designing for student retention and engagement being related around 7 key criteria. Maybe they call it the Iceberg principle. So really the idea is here that everything should be integrated so that you have a very well integrated curriculum with a coherent whole. Collaborative, so this would be both in terms of student collaborations and communications, but also I think the connectiveness with staff as well as their peers. Engaging, so obviously something that is engaging and it keeps students interested and challenged and enthusiastic. It should be balanced, and I think in this respect it's particularly talking to the workloads. Economical, so this really is relating to the temptation to hold back and not put every single little detail about something in there, but to be really focusing on the learning outcomes and what you need to do that. And this is something we particularly probably struggle with ourselves. Reflective, so this is really appreciating the idea that for students to really engage in deeper learning, they need to keep reflecting on their learning, that building on what they're doing as they go through, and we should give them the time and the space to do this. And then the gradual, so the idea of gradually encountering different ideas, materials, tasks and skills development, kind of over the modules, but also the whole qualification. So some of the ways that we try to do this, we have our modules are all delivered via Moodle VLE. This is, so I've got here is a screenshot of the kind of the front page of one of our modules. This is the one of our chemistry modules. This is a 60 credit module. And the key thing really is that everything is delivered via the study planner. So even though we have tabs along the top, most of the things can be found in the study planner. So it is kind of going back to what Catherine was talking about. It is a very structured manner. I think even in the days when we were kind of books and television, we still used to have like a study calendar, but I think they've been becoming increasingly structured over time. And look across the top here, this bar here is kind of like where students can track their progress. So if we have a quick look at, so this is kind of an example of the breakdown when you kind of click on that. So this kind of gives you information here about, so you can see here we have kind of links to the particular topic areas or the materials, to things like labcasts, tutorials, reminder about the assignment. Hold on. We would also look at things like we would have quizzes are included within the study week. We have links to the forums. As I say again, here kind of links to any tutorials that are on. What we found increasingly is when we developed this course, we would have some of these units, because we tend to talk in terms of units, would be quite long. But actually over time, there's been very much this idea of that students are wanting more structure, and it's important to kind of help their engagement. So we've actually now, where we've got things that go over a week, we've actually had to kind of provide this little bit more breakdown about what, you know, students should be kind of aiming to be doing within a week. So I think we're kind of getting definitely more structured over the time since we've moved to online. And these little green blobs or blue blobs are for the students to kind of track their progress, and then it updates in the study on the planner at the front, so they can kind of see how well or how far they've got in the module. Okay, sorry about this. Right, okay, so in terms of learning design, so that's kind of how we deliver the modules. We're probably very different to you in the fact that we have kind of module materials. So rather than relying on kind of lectures and recorded lectures, most of our stuff is delivered by kind of materials. So equivalent to kind of the old books, really. So one of the things that we have to, within learning design, is they're very keen that we build kind of a variety of different activities even within the materials. So, and try to avoid everything being assimilative. So assimilative being kind of the idea of kind of watching videos or reading, that actually we should be doing a lot more by student doing. So this would be kind of finding and handling information, kind of communicating with each other, or kind of tutors, productive types of things when they're kind of constructing things, experiential, so kind of learning from direct experience. So this might be some of the kind of experimental design type things that we would be doing, and then interactive, adaptive, as well as assessment. So modules are kind of required to kind of break down the weeks by all these different activities. Let's say this is something that's been happening over the years, because we've certainly been finding that if you have too much of the assimilative, it's not particularly engaging for students. So this is kind of the processes now that modules have to go through in their design period. So as I said, we're very different in the fact, and this is where I think we are very different, is that we have a lot of these study texts. So I'm not going to dwell too much time on that. But actually some of the things that I'm going to be talking about may also be relevant to you when you're designing kind of various other aspects. So the idea really is kind of, we tend to break up text a lot. We'll have a lot of what we call in-text questions, which are very simple, click, reveal, but they're kind of posing questions as you go along. So there's an example here of a reaction in the in the protein area, but it's kind of picking up the fact that it's an SN2 reaction and then asking them again. This is quite early on in the course, but kind of picking up things that they've maybe learned in previous modules, and also kind of very simple exercises. So we have some quite complicated ones, but I've included examples here of really simple things that would be you don't need to be very technically advanced and actually would be quite simple to do. But this idea of kind of breaking things up. Sorry, I don't know why it's not going on. So also we have, so things like also sending them off to kind of protein databanks. So these are examples, and getting them to look at modules and discuss them. So these are all the types of things that I guess are quite simple to do without kind of major kind of technical developers. Other things, we tend to use videos within our texts, but I know there's a lot of people who've been using videos, kind of like the slidecast and flip lectures. And I guess the key thing that we tend to do is try and keep these short, and we follow them up with questions. So as well as having kind of the transcript and stuff, we try to ensure that you're getting that kind of engagement, because it's quite easy to play a video and just not pay any attention. So try to get a little bit of engagement by some quite simple kind of click reveal type things afterwards. But I'm sure, and I think this was something, I think David Reed gave a presentation, I think a couple of weeks ago at the Dry Labs, and he was talking about kind of following up again the videos with kind of questions, getting people to think about what they've just seen. Okay, other things that we do, kind of safe sharing and collaboration. We try to build quite a bit of collaboration in where we can. It's not so popular with some students, but it's really, I guess the key thing is it's kind of got to have a purpose. So there's an awful lot of stuff that happens, particularly at our lower level modules, where so students would be working together to maybe do kind of design experiments or things like that. In this particular example, they had all went off to the protein data bank and asked to pick a protein of kind of choice and come back and kind of feed on the system that we have, which was kind of like a bit like a Pinterest kind of board, and kind of comment on each other's proteins of choice. Okay, so that's kind of some examples of the kind of things that we try to do. So we have kind of experiments and things as well, lots of different activities that we'll try and mix in the mix or put into the mix as students work through. The other thing we mentioned was student workload. So this has been increasingly a focus, I think, within the university. We have very strict workload tools for students. And you can see here, it even goes down to the point of kind of putting in the word count. And we have, you may not get to see it, but we have kind of 3 different reading time. You know, assuming if it's complex, you give it a high, kind of assuming it takes more time to read those words. We also have to kind of allocate figures, photos, tables, equations. All of these things are given kind of student workload. Audio, video, and I think I mentioned in the chat box to Catherine's talk that videos, we tend to assume that they're at least twice the run time to give students time to kind of appreciate what's going on, plus all the other activities. So we're very much kind of restricted to the workload that we would be expecting students to have per week. And the other really key thing, I think, is that it should be even. So certainly some of the work that they've done in the university was showing that you need to keep kind of the workload pretty even throughout the whole course, though we are increasingly kind of adding, because we have quite a structured delivery now, we tend to include kind of almost more break weeks or kind of catch-up weeks where they have maybe an assessment. Okay, I'm not looking at the chat, maybe I should have been. I hope there's nothing I should be picking up on. So in our 30, so say we run for 31 weeks, and we will have a certain number of tutor marked assignments. So these would be, so if we're a 60 credit module, we'd only have 6 in the year, and if it was a 30, we'd only have 3. So these really are the opportunities for our tutors to really feed back, and it's very, very personalised feedback on their assessment. But in between that, we tend to have kind of more informal, kind of self-paced feedback as students are going through. So these could either be the activities that are actually embedded, but also quizzes, and I think a lot of people use quizzes. But what we try to do within these quizzes, because this really is our only opportunity to provide students at distance with feedback, is to try and design kind of quite a lot of information within it. So if they get the wrong attempt, it tries to prompt them about exactly kind of where they're going wrong and what they should look at. And we'll design kind of different prompts for different responses. So there's a particular example there. So there's that. So we tend to have to use these kind of things because we don't have the opportunity for the students to kind of be talking directly there to the in the same way you would in a lecture. So in terms of support, so we have so when the students are on a module, they will have support from the module team. Also their tutors, as I say, they will be often we have kind of we have 20 students assigned to a tutor. Also, increasingly, we are doing things like having kind of student buddies who have maybe been from the previous year, but also kind of students will offer support to each other. So by and large, the mechanisms that we will use will be forums. And I think this is something we probably use much more heavily than most other universities, as well as tutorials. So we tend to have a mix of different types of forums. So each tutor group will have their own forum where they would maybe be running the collaborative activities, but we also have kind of topic-led where students can kind of ask questions. So for an example here, a student kind of posting that they needed some help, and then somebody will kind of go in and answer. Sorry, I keep clicking the wrong thing here. Somebody will kind of go in and answer the questions they have, or maybe direct them to where they can find that, or get them thinking about it. And quite often other students will step in to do that. So say forums are a really important role for us. And I think that's probably quite different to everybody else. Or I think we probably use them more than everyone else, rather. The other thing we have tutorials, but for us, our tutorials are optional. So students don't have to come to these. And I guess we're spending quite a lot of time thinking about online tutorials, how we would run these, or how we do run them. But even though we've been running them for quite some time, we certainly haven't got them right yet. So, you know, we're spending, you know, it's really kind of mixed how well they run. So similar kind of discussions, I think, to kind of what Catherine was talking about. So we tend to have, we run these in Adobe Connect. So we're very constrained by the tools that within there, but within that we can have polls, we can share applications, video pods, chat boxes, etc. And increasingly, we have been using, I think, and I think on dry, like I say, on the dry labs again, and I've seen lots of places the idea of kind of using these little document cameras to kind of capture things as you go along as well. So that's something that, you know, we do as well. Okay. So the other area that there are, we also have our student support team, and we have a series of kind of targeted communications that are sent out to students, all very much probably similar to other universities. So some of these will be general for all students, but also we will send out to students, for example, if they've missed an assignment. So there's kind of certain interventions, standard interventions, but also kind of proactive calls from tutors if a student is struggling. And also we have the student support team advisors. Okay, so it's a bit of a whirlwind. I think one of the biggest issues for us though really is this, and I think it's been picked up previously, is kind of the sense of a community. Previously we used to, our tutorials all, you know, used to be face-to-face. Students would have a lot more opportunities to meet each other at those face-to-face tutorials, and at kind of residential schools there's a lot less opportunity for students to do that now. So we've been trying, you know, we've been introducing more in the way of peer support with the student buddy schemes. Obviously there's the role of student societies. A lot of the student groups will have their own social media, so those are really, really, really important things, but we don't have so much kind of control, not control, but those are kind of outside of what we offer. So one of the things that we really are pushing within chemistry now is much more the visibility of the academic team, because that's something that we have tended to struggle with, particularly since a lot of their interactions are with their own tutors. So we're trying to be much more visible. So you know, I guess that's one of the things that we're trying to do. So yes, and so also I think for us the issue really also comes in between modules because of the way that we run. So we're kind of looking at trying to develop that sense of community kind of running over the summer when we have no modules. Anyway, okay, so that's more or less coming to the end here. So these are kind of just some of the action tips from that our university give us in our guidance of kind of the types of things that we could be looking at for designing for kind of to improve kind of, I suppose, retention and engagement for students. So things such as kind of engaging students very particularly early on, making things really, really engaging early on in the module, if possible, and making things kind of appropriate, lots of case studies, looking for potential retention black spots and addressing these as much as we can. Monitoring the workload, probably one of the most important things, making sure students aren't overloaded, is evenly distributed. And as I say, increasingly we're breaking this up into week by week basis. And even now looking at kind of much more kind of 2-hour study session type things. Key thing also, and this relates, is making sure that all materials and resources are easy to access so students aren't wasting time trying to find things. So you've got everything kind of gathered together. And I think that helps kind of enormously. Building in sufficient opportunities for self-assessment and formative assessment, Also making assessment relevant, interesting, challenging, building the skills up through modules. I mean, this is all pretty standard stuff, I'm sure everybody does anyway. But I think also building in the time to allow the students to reflect. So say that's something that we're doing more and more, but also we've been trying to, now that we've gone very much to the weekly structure, actually building up things that will go into the assessment as well. So they're working on things throughout the whole year. And I guess the key thing is kind of the tools to facilitate the development of supportive community of learners. So I think those are probably, so those are some of the tips that we would have. As I say, we are far from, we're still on the same journey as the rest of you. We may be a little bit further in some areas, but in other areas we have, the way that the OU operates, we have very set systems and structures. And so we don't have the opportunity to kind of necessarily trial as many different kind of software as others. Right, I ought to look at the chat box, I guess. So if anyone's got any questions, then.
Thank you, Eleanor, that was fantastic. To be honest, when you started off the talk, I was just incredibly envious of your beautiful Moodle interface. It just looks amazing, and the progress checklist and so on. I mentioned to you, we actually have a student here at Edinburgh who was formerly at OU, and this was the first thing she said to us, this checklist, this structure is so important. So when I see it now, I see it live, I realize why. It's just really nice.
You can do it in PDF. We used to have study calendars, but I think that is one thing that we've found has got increasingly important now that we're kind of online. Is that structure, but also allowing the kind of the weeks for people to catch up.
Yeah, just picking up on a previous comment about, we're talking about study skills and whether to teach them and when to sort of get students to reflect on their study skills and perhaps previous study skills. I mean, I guess you're coming from a perhaps slightly different perspective here, because you may not have school to university direct transition, but what do you do in relation to study skills? So
this is something, so I mean, I should have said that at the beginning, that we're open, which means there's no formal entry requirements. And so we have a really diverse range of students, all ages, but different backgrounds. So we kind of have to assume, so we when students start, the modules right at the start are very skills driven. So that really is almost the main focus. The kind of the knowledge, there is knowledge and understanding, but that is less of a focus. It is to do with kind of building the communication skills, and all the assessment is driven very much by the skills that the students will be doing. So kind of things like collaborating together to do experimental design, kind of on little kind of home experiments. Yes, so I guess that's where the focus is in. Things like the note taking will be built in to kind of as they're going along. So so they're very heavily integrated. And then as we move up the skills, so we have kind of like I forgot what we call it now. So we kind of have like a map where the particular skills that we should be doing at each level of study. We also now have an employability map, so looking at the employability skills that we should be doing at each level of study. So so those are all things that we would be kind of asked to focus on.
Yeah. A couple of comments in the chat relate to discussion 4 and getting students to engage in them. And I think this perhaps relates to the sense of presence, this academic presence that you mentioned in the student community part. I mean, how do you foster that sense of safety in terms of students feeling they can ask questions and there can be a genuine discussion in discussion boards?
I think this is probably where we struggle as well. I mean, it really depends on the group that you've got. One of the things that we did do, we used to have, so the forums used to only be in the smaller tutor groups, and we found that quite often there wouldn't be very much discussion unless you were getting them doing a particular activity. So one of the things we did was then having the topic wide, kind of like across the whole module. So you might have 100 to 200 students that contribute in, because you were more likely to get a group of students who would then kind of take something off and kind of run with it. But it really depends. Every year will be different, and it depends very much on the cohort. So that is something we struggle with, because a lot of students just like to hang around in the background. So a lot more students will come in and read and look at things, but they're actually prepared to post. But I think that is something that's changing, because that's the kind of thing that will be built now into our earlier modules, will be that idea of, you know, almost building it into assessment, the idea of getting them to post and kind of comment on somebody else's work. So to try and get over that barrier. And I think also it's where you've got collaborative activities where they get used to having, you know, talking that way. That would be helpful. So I can't remember, how do I get the chat box up? Was it all H?
Alt H, yeah.
A bit late to do it.
Aiming to relate most of the questions to that their discussion board was the latest one. I mean, that discussion board comment definitely relates to my own previous experience. When I studied discussion boards, you need a couple of champions in the class to kind of get it going.
And I think it also depends a lot on the people who first answer. So if, I think as long as the, you know, the tutors that answer, or, you know, even, you know, write in a very friendly, approachable manner, that's really, really important. And that's one of the reasons why I think we're really keen to try and have opportunity for us to do, you know, things like kind of labcasts and things that they know who we are. Hoping that then we're more approachable and they feel less daunted.
Julie Salmon has a great book on e-moderating, I think it's called, and it's essentially that. It's about structuring this kind of familiarity and then building a community, and, you know, just slowly structuring a kind of an ongoing discussion boards.
But also I think the tutor ones, so the tutors will also be running their own tutor group with much smaller groups, and quite often they'll be kind of giving them more structure there as well. So and the tutors are also accessible by email and phone, so if somebody really wants much more of a personal feedback, they can get that.
Dave just mentioned the chat about Snapchat and Messenger, and you mentioned that there'll be a proliferation of behind the scenes, whether we like it or not, social media and so on. I mean, it's just a case of we plow on and have our own sort of stream that we control, and I think it is control. Ultimately, it is about what we can sort of direct, acknowledging that there's probably parallel streams, or do you ever see those worlds meeting?
Sorry, I missed that.
So I would just, sorry, my long rambling question style. Essentially, there will be our discussion boards and our interactions and our formal communication with students. Students will probably have their own social media.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you see those worlds interacting, or is it just a case of us focusing on what we can do? I mean, I think personally, I probably do see the latter, that we should just look at what we should look at.
Yeah, I think our approach is we tend to stay away from the social media. I mean, we have like chemistry Twitter and things like that, but we stay away from those because they've been put together by the social media is kind of run by the students. So some of them will be, we have a student society called Alchemy for chemistry, and so they would often kind of set up Facebook groups for different modules and things. And then we have quite a good relationship with the people on there. So if it's ever felt that people are kind of overstepping the mark, quite often other students will come and tell us, you know, so they tend to self-regulate really well, because I think a lot of the students have got an idea of kind of what's fair and where, you know, maybe you shouldn't be discussing this assessment question or whatever. So so that kind of operates, and I think that's where a lot of the connections and the community building are done, or within those groups. But I think the buddies are also really useful because they're also kind of pointing out these groups to students on our forums. Yeah, so
the formal part on our side is pointing students that way, but then we don't follow them. We just
yeah, no, we don't follow it. But I think what we are seeing is a decline in our forum use, because people are going off to social media. As I say, we stay away from that.
I think probably a final question before we wrap up was, people were talking about reading and the extent of reading. So I suppose, first of all, do you sort of expect a broader reading of your students, and within lectures and within this idea of structuring, do you direct to books, to chapters, to sections? I mean, how granular can we make that?
Okay, so I guess for us, in terms of reading, it was based on the fact that people, when we started, people didn't have access to necessarily to libraries and all the rest of it. So we tended to develop our own materials, but actually certainly as we move higher up, there is a lot more, you know, we do send students off to read research papers. And is that kind of what you, I still can't see the chat. Yeah, so that's the kind of thing that we build in, the skills. So we would spend time looking at kind of how you dissect research papers and the rest of it, but we would still need to build in, I guess, the sufficient time to do that. that's probably not answering your question.
And yeah, that's so it's essentially, so in lecture notes, for example, you have the catalysis lecturing slides. Would you direct to Atkins? Would you direct to Atkins chapter 11, or would you direct to Atkins chapter 11?
No, I think, and that's something that we probably could do more so. I think because, as I say, when the OU started, the assumption was that you couldn't assume everybody would have access to books. So essentially we developed everything ourselves. So basically everything would contain within that reading. We don't tend to send them off. But once they start to get higher up, so like our final capstone project, they would be going off reading research papers.
Okay.
Yeah, so we don't tend to do that. I think we might do more so in the future, but currently.
Eleanor, I think I have downloaded as much as I possibly can from you in 30 minutes. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Really, I think I said to you before, I don't think you don't know how much you know in this space. It's just so useful to hear a voice of experience in terms of how an online delivery works, and just interesting your own journey increasingly online. So thank you very much for sharing your insights and expertise. I hope I captured most of the questions. The chat was quite busy, but I'll let you drift back through it at leisure if you want to pick up on anything.
I must admit, for us, it's engaging having everybody else dealing with the same issues that we do. And we get slightly frustrated that a lot of you are able to do things at a much greater rate and using kind of technology that we're kind of a bit restricted. As much as it might look lovely, it takes ages, and we are restricted.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, I think, the sustainability issue again, I think what you've done is shown a kind of a sustainable development over time, which is something that looks really amazing. So, all right. So I'm just going to stop recording that bit, figure out how